I grew up in this area. I went to ASU. I got my bachelor's in family and human development at ASU, and then I got my graduate degree from Baylor University in speech. I'm a wife, mom, and grandma, and fun fact, I'm an author of 3 young adult fiction novels and 1 children's book. Is this one for you? All right, so you're probably wondering why I'm here to talk about autism. So my husband is autistic, and 3 of my 4 children are also autistic. I also have an autistic brother. He's actually blind and autistic. And I've been working with children and adults with autism, first as a child development specialist for years, and then also now as a speech language pathologist.
Beautiful picture.
What was that?
That was a beautiful picture.
Thank you. That was a few years ago. So we're going to talk about prevalence first, because I feel like some people aren't aware of this. So if we look about back at the 60s and 70s, the diagnosis rate of autism was about 0.5 in every 1,000 children. So we jumped to the year 2000, and that rate has increased to 6.7 in every 1,000 children. And then 23 years later, 2023, 1 in every 36 children are being diagnosed with autism. I don't know about you, but that's a little alarming. And I don't know if people are aware of that, and I don't know why more people aren't talking about that. So if it continues to grow at this rate, they are estimating that by the year 2030, it is estimated that 1 in every 2 children will be diagnosed with autism. 50%. Okay, that's 50% of your grandkids, 50% of the students that you work with. Again, I don't know why more people aren't talking about this. And just keep in mind that that does not take into account the hundreds of thousands of adults that are being late diagnosed autistic, who have realized that they have been masking their symptoms their whole life to fit in. And also, it doesn't take into account the fact that girls are highly underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed because they are better maskers and they can hide their symptoms better generally than boys can. All right, so I wanted to start off with, there's 2 different schools of thought right now on autism, okay? So there's the medical model, and then there's also the social model. And we'll talk a little bit about each one. I think they both have their place, but I think things are kind of shifting more towards the social model right now. So the medical model is what we've always known. It's very familiar to us. There's a definition of what autism is. There's diagnostic criteria, which is difficulty with communication and interaction with other people, restricted interests and repetitive behaviors, symptoms that affect their ability to function in school, work, and other areas of life. And within the last several years, those diagnoses have also been coming with a level. So the level 1 would be requiring support, level 2 requiring substantial report, and level 3 requiring very substantial report. Okay, so it makes it seem very linear. So you're either here or you're here on that spectrum, right? So the social model sees autism a little bit differently. To them, it's a form of neurodivergence, okay? Neurodivergence refers to a brain that processes cognitive, social, and sensory information differently from the neuronormative or the non-autistic majority, okay? So traditionally, autistic communication has been labeled as a deficit, right? It's the autistic child's problem that they can't communicate with us. However, perspectives are kind of changing as people are recognizing that autism is more of a difference rather than a deficit, okay? So Dr. Damian Milton, he coined the concept double empathy problem. So what he kind of saw and understood was that it seemed like both autistic and non-autistic individuals were misunderstanding each other. And so he named it the double empathy problem. So what happened with that double empathy problem is Dr. Catherine Compton and her research team decided to do a study and see if there was something to that. You know, is it we're not understanding each other, or is it the deficit is just with the autistic person? What they did was they took 3 groups in their study. So the first group was all autistic individuals. The second group was all non-autistic individuals. And the third group was a mixture of autistic and non-autistic individuals. So according to that medical model, the deficit model, right? You would think that the most communication breakdowns would be within that autistic only group, because the deficit is with them. They can't communicate. They're not going to be able to communicate at all, right? Well, what they actually found was that the most communication breakdowns took place in that mixed neurotype group. So the autistics found a way to communicate with each other. The non-autistics, of course, communicated with each other. But the mixed neurotype group, that's where all the communication breakdowns happened, okay? So what we kind of take from that research study is that maybe we should be viewing autism as more of a difference in social communication, a difference in interactions, things like that, rather than a deficit, okay? So kind of more like a cultural difference. So if we went to a faraway country, they would have different expectations, different ways of communicating, different things that would be expected, right? When we're visiting them, than we would have if they're visiting us. So they wanted us to kind of think about it in that way. The other thing is that we're very much about trying to teach autistic kids how to act normal, right? To act like non-autistic kids. And what we're finding is, yes, those skills can be helpful, but we also want to let those autistic individuals know that that's not necessarily the right way to communicate or the right way to be social, because the way that they are is also okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if we support each other and recognize that we also have, you know, a problem with understanding them, what we need to do is we need to meet them halfway. We can't just expect them to come all the way over to us and communicate and act like us, okay? So this is a video that I found online that a good friend of mine shared with me when she was trying to explain the medical model versus the social model. So this kind of demonstrates the medical model, and I want you to, while you're watching, think of the able-bodied individuals as autistic individuals.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users. They run everything. There aren't any able-bodied people, so naturally, when they built the town, the community decided it was pointless to have ceilings 10 foot high and doors 7 foot high. So the ceilings were built at 7 foot and the doors at 5 foot. In every way, they designed the place the way they wanted it. One day, a few able-bodied people come to stay. One of the first things they notice is the height of the doors. The reason they notice is because they keep hitting their heads. They come to stand out by the bruises they carry in their foreheads. Soon doctors, psychiatrists, and social workers all become involved. Committees are formed. Many people are worried about what becomes known as the problem of the able-bodied. Without the town, there is a growth of real concern. Especially toughened helmets are handed out free to the able-bodied to be worn at all times. Races are designed to support and relief, while keeping the able-bodied wearer bent to normal height. The various groups of compassionate wheelchair users get together and form registered charities. Every quarter they have a collection day. Upturned pockets are left in pubs and shops for people to drop their small change into. There is talk of founding special homes. But then one day, it dawned on the able-bodied that there is nothing actually wrong with them, just that society excludes them.
Okay, so the disabled were well-intentioned, right? Like they saw there was a problem and we're trying to solve this problem, you know, let's help you, stand at the proper height. Let's give you helmets to protect your head. But they weren't actually helping the person be who they were, right? They should be standing upright. They should be able to participate in things that they can participate in. So it just kind of makes you think about, okay, so that medical model versus the social model, who is the deficit really with? Is there really a deficit? Is it just a difference?
Imagine it.
Okay, so the three main things that I wanted to talk about today, which I hope will help you to understand any autistic individual in your life, is that they think differently, they sense differently, and they learn language differently, okay? In and of itself, I mean, it seems like three small things, but those things encompass just about everything in their lives, okay? So first of all, how do they think differently? Well, they are whole to part thinkers, whole to part, okay? So when they enter a situation, they are taking in all of the information of every single detail. I like to think of them as little supercomputer brains. They're constantly processing everything, okay? Everything. Also, their brains don't take shortcuts easily. So when I think about what I'm thinking about and what I'm looking at, like, I'm able to kind of just, oh, I already know that, I already understand that, I don't have to really process that and just move forward, right? They have a very hard time doing that because their brain has to process everything and everything at the same time. I also believe that they try to make order out of that constant chaos in their head, okay? Have you ever known a child to line up their cars? Or to sort things into colors or shapes or size, things like patterns, routines, things that are repeated, because I think that helps them to be able to take a shortcut in their brain because they know what's coming next. They know what's expected because it's ordered for them. Okay. Also, that makes sense why autistic burnout and overwhelm are very common. We see a lot of meltdowns, right? Things are overwhelming. Why? Because their brains are processing everything at the same time and they can't take breaks or shortcuts. So this is just some examples of things that have patterns, routines, things that are consistent. A lot of kids are very drawn to the alphabet, to numbers, things that we say the same way at the same time. Same with songs. The lyrics are the same way every single time we hear it. My husband was trying to explain to me one day how his brain works differently than mine. And he said, "What do you think when you see a doorknob?" And I was like, "Turn the knob," and I opened the door. I didn't know like what he was expecting me to say, but that's what came to mind. Turn the knob, you open the door. He said, "Well, let me tell you what my brain is thinking when I see a doorknob. And this can apply to anything in the room." He said, "I'm wondering how far I have to lean and reach my arm forward to get to that doorknob. I'm wondering if that doorknob is going to be cold because my sensory system does not like to touch cold things. I'm wondering how hard I'm going to have to turn my hand to get that mechanism to unlock. I'm wondering how far I'm going to have to push or pull that door open so that I can open it. I'm wondering if the sun is going to be shining really brightly when I open that door because it's going to blind me. My sensory system does not like bright lights." And so he just kept going and going and going. And I'm like, okay, I think my brain took a lot of shortcuts there, because he's processing every situation, every possible outcome. His brain is going through that constantly. Okay. I kind of opened up my eyes and made me realize, like, okay, have you ever noticed that when an autistic child enters a new room or a new situation or meets a new person, they're very hesitant. Why? Because their brain has to process all of that new information constantly, okay? The second thing I wanted to focus on was sensory processing. So we receive information from the world around us through our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we touch. What happens is that information then goes up to our brain, and then our brain has to tell our body what to do with that information. So a very simplified explanation would be if you were to touch something hot, that pain and that heat would travel through your nerves up to your brain, and then your brain would say, ooh, that doesn't feel good. And they would send the motor information to move your hand, right? Well, what we're finding with sensory processing disorder is that their brains can under-process that sensory input or over-process that sensory input. And it's really tricky because it can change. One day it might be over-processing, one day it might be under-processing. Within the hour, it could change. So it depends on what other sensory stimuli is happening at the same time, whatever they're focusing on. So it can be very complicated to understand what the sensory system needs in these individuals. Back when I was in grade school, we only had 5 senses. Now there are 8. First one is tactile or touch, and that can include temperature, moisture, texture, anything that we can feel or sense through our skin. Number 2 is a newer one. It's called proprioceptive, and that's the pressure in our muscles and joints, okay? So our brain also has to process that and tell our body what to do with that information. So like if you're going hiking and you need to step and push harder to get over a rock or something like that, your brain can tell you to over-process that or under-process that. Number 3 is also a new one. It's called vestibular. That's our movement and balance. So things like rocking, swinging, spinning. Visual, so what we see. Auditory, what we hear. Gustatory, which is taste. Olfactory, which is smell. And then the last one is the last new one, and that's called interoception. And that's all of our internal sensations. So the feeling that we have to go to the bathroom, the feeling that we're hungry, that we're tired, that we're sick. All of those things that we just kind of know what they mean when we feel them in our body. We know, oh, I'm hungry, and so we go get food. Their brains can over-process or under-process that information as well. Sometimes potty training is very difficult because if their brain is under-processing that sensation that they have to use the bathroom, guess what? It's going to be hard to learn to use the bathroom on time, right? And it's challenging because, again, there's so many things going on. Their brain is processing everything, and some things are heightened, some things are lessened, okay? So if we think about sound, say, you know, you're calling your student's name over and over and over again, and it seems like they're ignoring you, they don't hear you. It may not be a choice. It may be their brain is just not processing that information enough, okay? If their brain is over processing that sound, it would be overwhelming to them. And actually, we've been doing a lot more research recently with autistic individuals, specifically adults who can communicate with us. And they have said that it can be physically painful to their bodies when some things are overwhelming to them or when their brain is over processing some of these things. So like that loud siren, when it goes off, if they're freaking out, that's because it could physically hurt them because their brain is over processing it to that point. Okay, so again, sensory processing is not necessarily something that they're choosing to do or not do. It could just be their reaction to what their body is feeling, and it's always out of whack. Now, as they get older, they can learn to kind of manage some of these things. Some things they grow out of, some things they don't. But it's not something that you can force them to do. Kind of like, you know, if you have a fear of something, a lot of people are like, oh, you just need to face that fear. But sometimes that causes trauma, and then it makes it so you can't try to overcome that fear, right? So it's something that we have to be very delicate with, because something else that we're learning about recently is that because they are processing everything and sensing everything more, they experience trauma and PTSD at a way higher rate than non-autistic and non-sensory individuals do. And that's like trauma. Like, we know what that does to a body, right? Like, it can affect your memory, it can affect all kinds of things. It can affect their ability to interact with people, their ability to interact in a new situation. All things we need to keep in mind. I just wanted to put this up here. I don't know if you guys have heard of this business. I learned about it when I was working in early intervention in Tucson. They actually make sensory equipment and other adaptive things for a very discounted price. They're a nonprofit. If you are in need of sensory equipment, or if that would be helpful for your school or for your home, they do weighted vests, compression vests, for your blankets, lap blankets, things like that. They also have different kinds of swings. The people that work there donate their time. A lot of them are retired. They donate their time, and so they only charge you for the cost of the materials. The thing with that is because they don't charge you for anything else, they don't ship their items. So if you do order something from them, you have to go pick it up or have a friend that lives in Tucson that will pick it up for you. But I found it a great resource. I've got some things from my own clinic for them, or from them. Okay, and then the third thing that I really wanted to focus on, and this is my specialty as a speech pathologist, is that autistic individuals learn language differently. So we've had this information since probably the 70s, but again, autism wasn't that common. It wasn't that, this type of language learning wasn't that common. And so it wasn't really in the mainstream yet, right? So a lot of older speech language pathologists actually may not be familiar with this, because it's just been, the last 10 years or so that it's been really more in the mainstream, and we're learning more about it. I actually didn't learn about it when I went to grad school. I had to take continuing education classes to learn about this myself. So first of all, they learn in chunks and then break it down into smaller pieces. That makes sense, right? Because we just learned that they think whole to part. So they take everything in and then they break it down into the smaller pieces. So it makes sense that they would learn language the same way. So they are taking in chunks of language at a time. If we teach them single words, that single word is a chunk to them, and they can't combine it with other single words until they move through the stages of language development, where they get to the point where they realize that single word has its individual meaning. Okay, so that's why we try to model phrases and sentences to them. It's not terrible if we model single words and they start repeating single words. It's just that to them, it's a chunk. And not just a chunk as in a phrase or something like that, but remember, they take in everything at once. And so when they learn a phrase, they're also learning, the situation that it was happening in, the emotions of the people involved when said, the smells that they smelled when they heard that phrase, like they're taking it in as a chunk, okay? They don't understand that those individual words have meaning yet. They often echo speech, music, body language, etc. So we kind of already knew about the speech and the music. We hear kids repeating song lyrics all the time, or repeating things that they've heard. That's called echolalia, but they can also echo body language. So something that my daughter did when she was younger, when she would see something on TV, she would just, in her brain, that's how everybody's supposed to do it. That's what she understood. So one day she came to me and I asked her what she wanted for lunch, and she was like, she put her finger on her chin and she made that thinking face, right? To her, she saw somebody else do that. That's what we do when we're thinking, right? And so she was echoing that. So things like that, we'll see facial expressions echoed, all kinds of things. They're also drawn to vocal intonation changes and music. So something that we do in the clinic is we don't just model phrases. We try to use a sing-songy voice when we're doing it because that makes it click in their brain for some reason. We call them intonation babies. They are drawn to that melodic intonation change of voices. That's why they're drawn to music so much. I worked with a little 2-year-old for a while, and somehow, you know how great little ones are at navigating electronic devices. He managed to find a Russian kids channel on YouTube with the tablet, and he started learning and repeating the Russian alphabet and the Russian numbers. His mom's like, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know how to help him. Like, what do I do? And if you think about it, like, it sounds different, right? It has a different, up and down to it. Same thing, I had a patient that said, he's really drawn to when grandpa's speaking Spanish, more so than people are speaking English. Well, because the Spanish was kind of new, he wasn't hearing it all the time. And so his brain was just drawn to that intonation change. When they are first starting out in their language development, very often we try to avoid asking them questions. Why? Because they can't answer us yet. They don't have those individual words that they can put together to form their own sentences. They're only repeating what they hear, okay? So if we say, what do you want for lunch? They might say, what do you want for lunch? They're just gonna repeat something else that they've heard. If they don't have a gestalt or a chunk that they have heard and memorized to repeat back to you that fits that question that you asked, they can't answer you yet. So it can be frustrating for both the individual and the person trying to ask the question. So we try to say more phrases. Let's see. You can't always take what they say literally. I always use this example because I feel like it really illustrates it. So, for example, your child or your student is watching Peppa Pig one day. She's, down by the water, by the docks. She sees a boat coming. She's excited and she says, the boat is coming, the boat is coming. And then she stubs her toe. Okay, 2-3 days later, like you're not even thinking about that episode. It's long gone. 2 or 3 days later, your child comes in the room or your student comes in the room. The boat is coming, the boat is coming. And you're like, there's no water, there's no boat, but they're really they have emotion, they're trying to say something, but you're like, what is going on? I don't know what they're trying to communicate to me. Well, if you remember that episode, remember they take it all in as a whole situation, a big chunk. At the end, Peppa Pig stubbed her toe. Okay, so they might be trying to communicate, I hurt myself. Okay, that's why it has emotion, right? And so trying to learn that and understand that those echoes have meaning. They very often have meaning. We just don't always know what that meaning is. And sometimes we have to be detectives to try and figure that out. So as an educator, it would be important if you're hearing a phrase over and over again, and you're not sure what they're trying to communicate or what it means, ask the parents, hey, when do they use this? Do you understand what this means? I had a patient that he came into the clinic and he started singing a song. I don't remember what song it was, but mom was like, oh, he sings that song when he wants to play with his cars. I was like, okay, great. Let's play cars. And we got the cars out, right? But had she not told me that, I would have had no idea. And she's like, oh yeah, and he sings this other song when he wants to go outside. That's, good information because he is communicating with that echolalia. But if I didn't know what he was communicating, I would think it was just gibberish. It's nonsense. He doesn't understand what he's doing. I also was working with a patient who had a lot of sensory differences. he was coming into clinic. It was kind of after 4th of July. And so I was asking Mom, hey, how did 4th of July go? Because I know he has a hard time with loud noises. And she's like, actually, he did pretty well. But he kept saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And I kept offering him food and he wasn't hungry. And I didn't understand. And it just so happened that in the clinic, in that moment, it was thundering outside. And so there was a big boom, thunder. And he started saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. And I was like, he means it's loud, or I don't like that sound, or it's too much, right? But she says, but he also says I'm hungry when he is hungry. Like, so sometimes we have to be a detective, right? Offer them food. If they're not hungry, then okay, what in my environment is bothering them right now? What is too loud? What is overwhelming for them? So again, we have to be detectives, which is hard. They try to communicate with body language, with facial expressions, with picture cards, with food wrappers, and with communication devices. If you interact with a parent of an autistic child, like they know, like, oh, he needs this, or oh, they need that, or they want that, like just by looking at their body language, their facial expressions, like they know, right? Because they pay attention. When the words aren't there, you have to pay attention to all of the other clues. They are communicating. Even a meltdown or a tantrum is communication, right? Especially if they don't have words yet. Something's wrong. I don't like something. They are communicating something. I worked with a little 2-year-old who we tried to do the picture cards. We made, pictures of all of his favorite foods. We magneted them to the fridge. Every time we got him that food, we were pointing, we were naming it, using a phrase, not a word. I want milk. It's a strawberry. We were turning them everything into phrases. We were doing all the things. He would not use them. Come back and Mom says, he went and got the muffin box out of the recycle garbage can and he gave it to me. So I figured out he wanted, muffins, those little prepackaged muffins that he loves. So I was like, wait a minute. And then the next time he went and got the pizza box out of the recycled garbage can to tell me he wanted pizza. So what did we do? We cut out the food wrappers and we magneted them to the fridge, and then he could tell us through those. That's what made sense to him. We had to meet him halfway, right? They can also communicate with repeated video or audio clips. I know that screen time is always a hot topic. It's a big issue, right? There is research, too much screen time can have negative effects. However, we are learning that autistic individuals can communicate through video clips and repeated audio clips. So I don't know if you've ever seen a child, play, rewind, and they keep playing that same clip over and over, play, rewind, play, rewind. They can be trying to communicate something from that clip, some emotion that was felt, the words themselves, the situation. So again, we have to be detectives sometimes. All right, so just a little bit more about language. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about Gestalt language processing, which is what that echolele, and what we most commonly see with autism. So about 90% of kids with autism are Gestalt language processors. So they learn things in chunks. The first stage is that delayed echolalia. So they're repeating words and phrases, or what we call gestalts. That's the stage when you ask them questions, they can't really answer you. Stage 2, they start mitigating those gestalts, mixing and matching, trimming them down, starting to realize like, oh, these different words have different meanings. And when I drop off a word here, it can still kind of have the same meaning. So for example, stage 1, might be, let's go outside, okay? Stage 2 might be, let's go. Okay, so they dropped off outside, but it still kind of has the same meaning and they still kind of get what they want when they say that. Stage 3 is when they get to the single word part. So that's where typically developing children start their language development. They start with the sound and then the single words, and then they start putting 2 words together, 3 words together, okay? So they have 2 stages before they get to that single word stage. So before then, they don't realize that that chunk is made up of individual single words that have individual meanings. So let's go outside turns into let's go, and then go, okay? And then they realize go means we're gonna do something. Once they get to that single word stage, that's when they start trying to combine words, and they start realizing that they can do that and change the meaning of what they're trying to say. But even if they're in stage 3, sometimes they still revert back to that stage 1 and 2, depending on if they're overstimulated, if the sensory stuff is crazy, if they're dysregulated, if there's a lot going on, if they're nervous about something, they can go back to that echolalia stage. And then stages 4 and 6 is when new original phrases or sentences with beginning grammar begin, and then later complex grammar. So we do not correct grammar in the first few stages, because the goal is to get them to memorize and repeat as many phrases as possible, because the more phrases they repeat exactly as they hear it, the faster they'll move through those stages of language development. If we're trying to correct their grammar, it's a chunk to them. It doesn't make any sense. So we're just kind of wasting our breath. So if we're trying to change, verb tense or something, it doesn't make sense to them yet, because they don't know that that individual word can be manipulated, because they don't know it's an individual word yet. Another thing that's very common with language in autism is childhood apraxia of speech. So 64% of autistic individuals have childhood apraxia of speech. What that is a motor planning speech sound disorder. A lot of children who are non-speaking and maybe non-speaking their entire lives might have apraxia. So their brain knows what it wants to say. All of the muscles and articulators work and can function properly, but there's a disconnect between the signal there, okay? So sometimes it might connect and you might get the right word. But the next 50 times it might not connect and you might not get the right word. And for an autistic individual, that would be very frustrating because it's not efficient, right? And so they might stop trying because they know it's hard. Kids without autism with apraxia, it's a lot of drilling and repetition and repeating, because we're trying to teach them that motor memory so that they can kind of learn that, outside of that connection. I don't know many autistic kids who would have the patience to sit there and drill flashcard after flashcard after flashcard and repeat those kind of things. So a lot of times they'll stop trying. And then those are the kids that usually learn to communicate with the tablets or the picture cards. Another common thing is called cluttering. So 50% of autistic individuals, I'm actually treating a lot of adolescents right now who are clutterers, actually some grade school kids as well. It's disorganized and or fast speech with or without stuttering. So again, they have little supercomputer brains that are moving a mile a minute, everything's, and so what they're trying to say, by the time they're getting it out, their brain has already moved on to something else. And so sometimes it's disjointed, or, it's hard for them to sound, have that flow. And then another common thing is hyperlexia. So 80% of children with hyperlexia are autistic. That's early recognition of letters, phonemic and phonological relationships, and early reading, usually before the age of 3. So here is some videos. The first one is my daughter when she was 2. So she was a late talker. She didn't start talking until closer to 2. But then she started with that echolalia. So this is a long gestalt. She is echoing, I was telling her a story, and then we were kind of doing it back, and she was echoing long parts of that back. She doesn't necessarily know that each word that she's repeating has individual meaning yet. She's echoing it back as a chunk.
Once upon a time, a sweet little pig. When suddenly a big bad wolf came creeping up the carpet and nothing to it. But pig swept me through. Said the wolf,
Not by the hair, my chin.
then I know. And they brought out and
Okay, so you can see that she's very dramatic, like she's got that intonation pattern, she's kind of portraying the excitement of when we, did the story. Like I said, she always echoed body language, facial expressions, things like that. Everybody thought she was a drama queen because everything was extra with her, but that was just how she understood things. That's just how she was. The second video is my son, when he was a toddler, he kept repeating the same song lyrics over and over and over again. So if you want to start it like a third of the way through. Yeah.
baby, always oh, baby, oh.
It's just a compilation of multiple videos where he's singing and singing. Okay, you can pop it. Does anybody know what song he's singing? Baby, baby, oh yeah, okay, so for some reason that stuck in his head and he repeated it constantly. So the thing with Gestalt language processors is very often at a young age, they're trying to repeat back a whole chunk of something and they don't have the articulatory skill yet because they haven't started with sounds and then moved to words. And so if they hear something like to infinity and beyond, to you, it might sound like, it's the same intonation pattern. So sometimes you can pick it out like, oh, we just watched that movie. Like, I know what they're trying to say, but the articulation is not quite there yet. So that kind of gets there as they practice more.
What?
Okay. Oops. So this next one is my daughter when she was 5. We actually had bought my grandpa's property down here, but I was still working in Tucson, so I was commuting. And my husband texted me one day, our 5-year-old daughter is sitting in her swing in the backyard, reading an anatomy book. I was like, okay. So when I got home, I was like, I'm gonna ask her some things to see if she actually understood what she was reading. Okay. Tell me again, what causes hiccups?
Okay. Your vocal your diaphragm goes up really fast, letting air out your lungs really fast, which makes the vocal go like that really fast, and allows you to make the sound.
Okay, so this is an example of cluttering. Can you tell how disjointed it was? She also has some stuttering in there. She also takes breaths at really weird places. I've tried to work with her on this, and it's just how she does it. She'll be in the middle of a word and she'll take a breath, or she'll be in the middle of a sentence and take a breath. But you can tell she knows what she wants to say, but she just keeps trying to get back to what she's trying to explain, right? Because I think her brain is just going too fast. This next one is when she was 2 again. Again, she was just learning to talk and starting that, echolalia. But she was really drawn to those shows, like A is for apple, apple, all of those phonics type things. And so I was like, I'm gonna get her some flashcards and just kind of see if she's interested, and we'll see what happens. So I pulled them out and she started reading. So, next one. Again, drama. Next one. Like, I didn't teach her that. She figured that out on her own, just those phonological relationships like, and phonemic relationships, it clicked in her brain. Sound good?
Yeah.
Good job. Okay, so I thought that apraxia deserved its kind of own slide. Just because we're learning a lot more about it recently, and a lot of people don't know about it yet. Okay, so remember that childhood apraxia of speech, that disconnect between the brain and the articulators? Well, it can happen with our body as well. So you can have apraxia with motor things. So not being able to move your arm where you want to move it, or your leg, things like that. So apraxia is difficulty with skilled movements, even when a person has the ability and desire to do them. Apraxia is caused by brain disease or damage. We don't know what causes it often. Sometimes we do, like if there's been an accident or something. The brain is unable to make and deliver correct movement instructions to the body. So one type of apraxia affects speech. The brain struggles with lip, jaw, and tongue movements. Other types affect the accuracy of limb movements, response to verbal commands, and facial movements such as winking, okay?
Well, similar to the side effects of the stroke.
Yeah, yeah, we actually see apraxia with strokes a lot, yeah. Okay, so the next one is some videos that, oh, I got it, sorry. The next one is some videos of a dad that I found on TikTok. Yes, I am on TikTok. I view gardening TikToks and autism TikToks all the time. So this is a dad that I came across, and he's going to explain a little bit about his daughter and their journey in learning that she had apraxia.
So I found some video of me working with Marissa back in the ABA days before we truly presumed competence and didn't realize how smart she was. And I'm going to explain how we were so misled and why this is such a big deal. Ready? Catch. Catch. Oh, okay. It's really cute hearing little Logan say almost at the end of the video, like cheering his sister on. But anyway, in this next one, you'll hear me say catch, catch, catch. Like she don't understand what we're doing. And at that point in time, I wasn't sure because she never really paid attention to stuff or participated or did what we asked her to do. Sometimes she would, but it was like she was in her own little world or something. That's not the case. These kids have bodies they can't control caused by something called apraxia. Marissa, catch, catch. Pay attention, catch. So once again, we were so confused because we thought she didn't understand what we were telling her to do. Like, does she understand she needs to catch the ball? Why isn't she moving her hands towards the ball? Sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. Is she in a trance? No, it's literally that she can't move her body. She's stuck. She understands everything we're saying. She's not in her own little world. She completely comprehends everything, but she can't get her body to move. The signals from her brain to her body are disconnected at certain times. But then other times she does listen, but then does the complete opposite to leave you even more confused. Like this. Hey, right there, catch. Catch, hey, catch. Good throw. And that one is kind of funny when you look back on it. But imagine how confusing it is when the top autism school in the area is sending home progress reports telling you your daughter can't identify what the color green is or what a giraffe is. And you guys have been working on that stuff for months. Like even in that last video, she caught it, but then she didn't throw it. Does she not know what throwing means? And then you put into context the reports coming back from the so-called professionals who are basically telling you your daughter has the cognitive abilities of a toddler. Dude, they literally sent home a report that said she didn't know who I was. She couldn't identify me. Do you know what that does to a father? Like my 6-year-old daughter doesn't know who I am. And they're basing that all on her inability to point to the picture of me when they ask which one's your dad. But the problem is she can't control when her body points or where it points to. All these therapy and assessments and public education are all using motor-based testing to determine cognitive abilities, and it's misleading parents all over the world. And thank God we discovered letterboard communication. And now we know how intelligent our daughter actually is. And I'm going to showcase it to the world so other parents don't make the same mistakes that we did. Your kids are fully in there. They just have bodies they can't control, so they seem less intelligent than they actually are. So I'm gonna show you guys an example of the brain-body disconnect and why autistic non-speakers are often misunderstood. Get 5 bags of our chips. I said 5. So then she says, forget you, Dad, now you get none. But seriously, if she was taking a standard test, they would mark down that she didn't understand what the number 5 is. And if that's the case, then explain this.
345 times 9. Nice and slow. Get right on it. 3, 1, 5.
And here's another example. Hey, Rissa, can you grab me 3 wrestlers? I said 3. Yeah, at this time, not happening. But once again, check this out.
What is 521 plus 689 plus 32? Ready?
You got this, Rick.
Ready? Oh, nice and slow. Go. 1, 2, keep going. 4, 2, perfect. Good job.
So imagine, if I didn't understand what the concept of the brain-body disconnect was, or what apraxia is, how misleading it could be when a professional tells me that my 11-year-old daughter doesn't understand what the number 3 or 5 is.
H A T.
So she probably had to work really hard to get her finger to be able to point to things, but once she learned how to communicate that way, that was the motivating factor, right?
T O G I T S H E A R T E N I N G. Many people think that I have non-adult abilities, so it's kind of just disheartening.
Did you see that? Many people think that I have the cognitive abilities of a toddler and it is disheartening. And Dad's like, how did you know how to spell disheartening? Because like they didn't think that she understood anything, right? Like she understood everything they were saying. She just couldn't respond because her body wouldn't let her.
So I found some videos, so I'm gonna show you guys an example.
Sorry. Okay, so like I said, a lot of these kiddos that really don't kind of get past that first stage of language development and can't get those words out, potentially have apraxia. A lot of times we will help them learn to communicate with other means. So this is alternative and augmentative communication. So that could be baby signs, that could be picture cards, that could be tablets. Do any of you guys have these in the classroom or school or at home? So research has shown that, because a lot of parents will be like, well, but if they learn to talk on this device, then they're not gonna learn to speak. Well, the research shows that it can actually help them with their language development. If we get them these communication devices when they are young, it helps them move through their stages of language development. Why? Because every time they push something, it says it for them and they're getting those words, okay? It repeats the sentence for them. They can repeat it back, they can echo it. That helps them move through their stages of language development.
Well, with something like this, if they have lack of control, they may not be able to get their tone to actually do what they want it to do to be able to form the words
That's right.
at all.
It could also affect their body movements. So being able to press buttons can be challenging for them as well. But sometimes it's easier to get your finger to move than the however many muscles it takes to move and articulate the sounds that we're trying to form. And each sound, we have to reposition those muscles to make the entire word, right? So a sentence would be overwhelming, whereas getting your finger to move, it's easier to train your body and to push your body to do that and learn that than it is to get those words out. And she was using a letter board, and eventually she moved to the keyboard, which then the computer would say back what she was typing. Okay, so what does this mean for you guys? Just a reminder that it's a spectrum. There's no one size fits all, okay? So I can't necessarily create a lesson plan for you that's gonna work for everybody, right? That's the tricky part. Every autistic individual is different, just like every individual, every kid is different. So what can schools do? What can educators do? They can provide a supportive, structured, and predictable learning environment. Again, every time we introduce something new, it's gonna be a little overwhelming at the beginning until they kind of get used to it. So things that are predictable, things that are structured really help their brain to be able to take breaks, and then we see less meltdowns. Providing sensory supports. There's a lot of mixed feedback about this, right? Because, you know, if one child has one toy and another child has another toy, like it's distracting, it's hard to make it work like in a classroom environment. But a lot of autistic kids, if they are dysregulated with their sensory system, they're not going to be learning or participating in anything until they feel regulated. So providing those sensory supports for them is key to helping them to learn. Things like low sensory areas or calm down spaces, having multiple options for sensory. Remember I said that sensory can change, like from one day to the next, from one situation to the next, depending on what's going on. So if you know that this one child, you know, likes to bounce on the yoga ball, one day you offer the yoga ball and that's not doing it. What do? We have to have a lot of different tools in our toolbox, a lot of different sensory options. So if something's not working, we try something else, right? Verbal warnings and visual supports. This is something that I always do in my clinic, because transitions are hard, because what are we doing? We're transitioning to something new, something different, especially if it's not part of their normal routine. Things like visual timers, verbal warnings, like we have 5 more minutes and then it's time to clean up. We have 3 more minutes and then it's time to clean up. You're preparing them for that change, okay, for that difference. Task breakdown with clear instructions with visuals if possible. So my mom was actually a special education teacher for years. And she shared with me that she would put together boxes with a whole activity in it, and it would have visuals of how to complete the entire activity. So all you had to do was take out the box, the instructions are there visually, all the pieces are there. Those things were very helpful for her. And then also trying to incorporate special interests into lessons. So a lot of the kids that I work with, their special interest is trains or dinosaurs or cars. I don't know how that would look for you guys, like in the classroom. But I'll share an example in a little bit that my mom shared with me. Okay, so again, things that we can do in the classroom: cultivate a sensory friendly environment, embrace neurodivergent whole body listening, providing examples and templates for work assignments. So sometimes starting a task can be overwhelming. So if there's an example that they can look at, oh, this is what they want, super easy, they'll get right on it. Supporting executive functioning by breaking assignments into smaller, actionable tasks. So again, sometimes that whole task might seem overwhelming, but if we say, this is the first task, let's start here, it's a little bit easier. Allow for sensory breaks and sensory detox spaces, and then provide clear visual schedules and instructions. So these are some examples of like a sensory corner. I've seen a lot of classrooms that I've been in have been starting to make more of these like sensory corners where there's an area with a lot of different sensory things. So if the child needs something, they know where to go, they can find what they need, and they can interact with it. And then when they're ready, they can come back and join the class. One of the schools that I worked at actually had an entire sensory room. I know all schools can't do that, But especially in the bigger cities, again, 1 in every 36 kids, right? We're seeing this a lot more, potentially a lot more in the future. So this is something that you might want to start planning for and preparing for, especially if in 5 years, it's 1 in every 100. Yes.
So my son, when he was young, they put him in a small room as punishment because he couldn't concentrate.
Uh-huh.
He loved it. And then if he could get away from the other students, he could do all the work at once,
He could focus.
bring
Yep.
it back in. Now that he's an adult, he's in college now, and he informed me that the problem wasn't us. The problem was figuring out how to get us to understand him.
Yep. It's that disconnect, right? But anyways, if it's something that you could do, a lot of times it's kind of put together by the occupational therapist. But just having a space when there's a child that is just meltdown after meltdown, disruption after disruption, having a place where they can just go and swing, because swinging can be very calming for a lot of kids with sensory dysregulation. Or, crashing into the mat, jumping off the block and crashing into the mat, things like that. Once their system feels regulated, they can go back and interact, right? But having that space where, and I've seen it where there's, 2 or 3 kids in the sensory room at a time, different IAs bringing different kids from different classrooms that need it, and then after, it could be a couple minutes, it could be 15 minutes, leaving and going back to class. Things like weighted vests and compression vests. So this is something that company that I shared, the Special Needs Solutions in Tucson, they will make these for a very discounted price. The weighted, for my daughter, it helps her feel grounded. So when she was having a meltdown, she didn't want to be touched, she didn't want to be picked up, she didn't want to be hugged. I would wrap her weighted blanket around her and set her on the couch, and she would just kind of be there, right? And she could process, okay, what am I feeling? What's going on? And she could kind of move through it. The compression vest for kiddos that really like pressure, the ones that really like bear hugs and things like that. This actually works often with kids that like to bang their heads and things like that. It's just a different change in that pressure can sometimes reset that sensory. Both of these, we don't leave them on all day. Like it's usually like 20-30 minutes at a time, 2 or 3 times a day. Because otherwise it can be overstimulating to their body as well. Jewelry. If I don't give my daughter jewelry, the silicone on my spatulas disappears, and like I don't know what happens. She just chews it off and it disappears. Sometimes I find pieces of it around my house. But some kids need that proprioceptive input in their jaw and joint, muscle and joint. So sometimes having something that they can wear and put it in their mouth, then they're not biting, they're not doing other things where they're trying to seek that pressure. Noise canceling headphones for kids that are very sensitive to sound. And lots of classrooms, unfortunately, can be loud. There's a lot of different kids, there's a lot of different needs, there's a lot of things going on. So if you're noticing that a student is overwhelmed by a lot of the noises in the classroom, sometimes helping them with the noise canceling headphones can help eliminate some of that anxiety. A lot of autistic kids don't like their heads touched. They don't like things around their face. And so this is something that you would have to model first. Like you would put them on and like, oh, it's really loud in here. I'm going to wear these headphones so that it's not so loud. And then every once in a while, you might see them go and get the headphones and put them on. It's like, oh yeah, this works. This helps. Using a lot of music, educational songs, intonation changes, right? Those things are going to stick. They're going to learn faster if there's music involved. I don't know if you've seen the feet bouncers on the chairs. Sometimes they just need to move their body. So when I was a kid, like if the kid couldn't sit still, they had to sit out for recess. They were being punished. Those kids are the kids that need to go move their bodies. Like if they don't get that movement, they're not going to be able to settle and listen and pay attention. their sensory system is seeking that because their brain isn't processing it enough. So they feel like they need more and more and more and more. And so until they get that movement, that more movement, it's gonna be very hard for them to focus and pay attention and sit still. Wobbly seat cushions. I actually had some of these things in my car, but since I was running late, I did grab them. So this is just kind of like an inflated cylinder type thing and has different textures on different sides. A lot of my kids with ADHD that I'm working with or with autism, if we're trying to sit in the chair, I'll put that underneath them and they can kind of wobble while we're doing stuff. And surprisingly, they can focus better while their body's moving. All of these aren't necessarily practical for in a classroom, right? But some of these things, if you know, you're thinking about that sensory room, or if you do have a space for something like this, again, swings can be so regulating for a lot of kids. Also jumping, trampolines, yoga balls. I do a lot of helping the kids sit on the yoga ball and balance, because if we don't do that before we start our session, we're not going to get anything done. He agrees. Okay, and then having like a calm down corner, right? So a place where if they're feeling overstimulated, overwhelmed, it's like a quiet space where they can go, they can be away from everybody. Some put up little tents, you know, we have pillows in there, we have calming things, things that kind of will help bring their all that anxiety and all of that overwhelm, kind of help it come down. And now to the verbal and visual warnings. So again, with that, we have 5 more minutes and then it's time to clean up. If you had a visual that every time you said that, you could hold that up, that would make it click even more. Things like, you know, after lunch, we will have centers. We're preparing them, you know, we're getting them ready for that change. The school bus is taking you home today. Grandma will meet you at the bus. And you might need to repeat that a few times before the end of the day. 5 more minutes on the playground, then we'll line up. Again, all of these transitions can be very challenging for them, especially if it's a preferred activity. If they need to move their body and it's time to line up, they're not gonna wanna line up because their body is telling them they need more movement, right? Okay, so the more that we turn this into a routine and a pattern, the easier it will be. All of the kids that I'm working with in clinic, the first several visits, every transition's hard. Every time it's time to clean up and it's time to go is hard. But I always use that visual timer. I always use the verbal warnings. After about the 3rd visit, it starts clicking and they're ready to go, like they get it. So this is some examples of some visual timers. The one I use is the countdown timer, the little duck on the right. Unfortunately, it's a free app on my phone, so right after it dings, it'll pull up an ad. But that's, so I have a timer for, you know, when my session is about to end, and then I always pull this out and I tell them, we have 5 more minutes, and I show them that it has a full circle, and then they can see as it count downs and it goes click, 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 click. And if they're sensitive to sound, I turn it way down so they can still hear it, but they can still hear it clicking. They know it's happening, they know it's coming. And then when it reaches the end of that 5 minutes, it does something. It's not always a duck, it's a different picture each time. But then it, you know, makes a little noise, or, you know, like confetti or something. And then, oh, we're all done, it's time to go. And I'll show them on their picture card, it's time to go, we're all done. My daughter, we actually use this light up one in our house. You set the timer and it stays on green. And then as it gets closer to being the end of the time, it switches to the yellow light. And then when it's done, it switches to the red light. And then ours has a little button on the top. So it was her job to go and touch the button to turn the timer off. And that was a fun thing for her. And so she enjoyed that. Visual schedules and routines. So the potty time, that's one that I made for a lot of my clients in early intervention, because a lot of them were starting with that potty training, but sometimes just having a visual in the bathroom, these are the steps, can be very helpful. A visual schedule, something that you can kind of interchange some of the pictures throughout the day, depending on if something is happening that's different. But for the most part, maybe you keep the same routine, right? And so going over that visual schedule and showing them first, we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this, can be very helpful so that they can prepare themselves for what's gonna happen that day. And then also a first then board. So in my clinic, I have different activities and toys that we can interact with during our sessions. I have a picture of each one of those with a Velcro sticker on the back. And then I have our first then board. So I pick about 6 of those because I know some kids I cannot bring out the bubbles. That's going to be a disaster. Some kids I cannot bring out the yoga ball. You know, it'll just get too crazy. So I handpick the things that I think they'll be interested in. And sometimes I try new options here and there. So I only give them options of like 6. And then they get to choose, they come in, they pull it off and they put it on the first square. And then when they pick the next one, we put it on the then. Okay, and then if we move to a next thing, we take both of those off and we start over. First, we're gonna do this, then we're gonna do this. Core picture vocabulary labels. So again, even if you're labeling like chair, wall, clack, when you model those to these autistic children, you're gonna wanna make it into a phrase. But they're probably learning how to read by seeing that individual word. But for their language, we want to turn it into a chunk for them. So if they see a chair, we're going to want to say, let's sit on the chair. Okay, we're going to turn it into a phrase. And these are the task boxes that my mom was talking about. Also, sorting activities can be very fun for them. So, you know, which word is a noun, which one is a verb? Let's put the nouns in this cup, the verbs in this cup. So anything where they can make order out of that chaos is going to be more appealing to them. So again, having task boxes where you have the whole activity in a box. You have picture directions, step by step, so they know exactly, they don't have to talk to you, they don't have to ask you, they can see exactly what's expected, all the pieces are there. And then my mom also said that sometimes these like mesh partitions to kind of separate different work areas can be helpful so that it's not distracting to see what the other child is playing with or doing in their station. Okay, so I told you I'd come back to this special interest. So again, trains, dinosaurs, you know, cars, how do we incorporate these special interests into our lessons? My mom said she was working with a girl. She just could not get her to be interested in math at all. Her special interest was princesses, okay? So she had the idea, I'm gonna bring these pretend jewels and we're gonna talk about princesses and we're gonna do our math that way. She loved it. It clicked, it worked. Like as soon as she incorporated something that she was interested in, it made it happen. Okay, and just real quick, as I'm finishing up, I wanted to touch on what is coming along with that social model, right? And I do think that there is a place for that medical model. Right now, we need that diagnosis so that we can get certain services, things like that. But again, placing a little bit more emphasis on that social model as more of a difference rather than a deficit. We don't have to fix them, right? If your child had cancer and was going through treatments, you wouldn't tell them, you need to act like you're not sick because that's making other people uncomfortable, right? If a child is flapping their hands, an autistic child, and you say, oh, stop doing that. You know, people are going to look at us. That's making other people uncomfortable. Is that fair to them? That's who they are. They need that sensory input. Their brain is telling them, I'm not getting enough movement. I need movement. Okay. So that social model helps us to realize that maybe it's more of a difference, right? So neurodiversity affirming practices are what a lot of the newer therapists are trying to move towards. Neurodiversity is the diversity of human brains and minds, the infinite variation of neurocognitive functioning within our species. Neurodiversity is a biological fact. It's not a perspective, an approach, a belief, a political position, or a paradigm. So neurodiversity affirming therapist does not treat the autism, okay? They don't try to change the autistic person by training them to act normal. This is a harmful practice that teaches the autistic person to mask who they are, extinguishes their neurodiverse identity, and teaches them that they are not accepted as who they are, but rather need to be changed through changing their behavior so that they can fit in to the neurotypical world around them. The social model considers ABA therapy a dehumanizing compliance-based practice that has been linked to poor mental health. Again, that PTSD, right, we talked about, and increased suicide in autistic adults. A lot of these things we're not thinking about, right, as their children, but all of these things build up in them, that PTSD, trauma, we're forcing them to not be who they are, not be who they are. They have to pretend to be something else. By the time they're becoming adults, you know, nobody accepts me for who I am, you know, what's the point? So a neurodiversity affirming therapist would provide services and supports only as needed, okay? If they, not all Gestalt language processors get stuck in their language development. Some moves right through the stages and they communicate just fine. So if they don't need speech, we're not gonna send them to speech. If they're managing their sensory, we're not gonna send them to occupational therapy, things like that. So non-neurodiversity affirming practices would be things like the applied behavior analysis therapy, preventing behavior. So this is a hard one at school, right? Because you have to protect the safety of other students. You know, there's different things that you have to take into consideration. However, again, if the child is throwing themselves down on the floor and they don't have words yet, they are communicating something to you. They are trying to tell you something. So first, try to figure out what they are trying to communicate to you, okay? Treat them as a human being, as an individual who is trying to communicate something. We do not take away communication devices. So I feel like I'm having communication device evaluations all the time now because nobody in this area has them. None of the schools are providing them yet. But this is a now standard thing, which is considered what we need to be doing for these children, okay? But a lot of teachers will take them and put them up on the cabinet because they keep pressing words and it keeps saying them and it's disrupting their class. That is their voice. If a child in the classroom was singing a song constantly and disrupting somebody, you couldn't take their voice away from them, right? You would have to figure out something else. That communication tablet is their voice. We don't take that away from them.
I have a question.
Yes.
The ABA therapy, we just got a diagnosis, so we're just starting off with it. Well, we've known all along, but we just finally got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Her doctor referred her for that.
Every single doctor is going to refer. Why?
What is it?
Because the medical model tells you there's something wrong with your child. This is the therapy that's going to fix it. Okay. What ABA therapy is it's a compliance-based therapy. So they are training your child to not have the behaviors that you see undesirable. So if it's the flapping the hands, if whatever it is, they're going to help, the therapist is going to help train your child to not do that behavior. Okay, but that takes away who they are very often. And the research nowadays, especially of autistic adults who have been through ABA therapy have said how dehumanizing and how traumatizing it is, because a lot of times they will withhold things that they need until they do something. Okay, I worked with a little boy who had ABA therapy in his home. He was 2, but all of his sensory stuff, he was a mover. He had to move his body. All of his sensory stuff was in the backyard. Okay, well, to get them to open the sliding glass door, he had to press the square, picture the square, press the triangle, press the circle. He had to do things in a certain order. He had to do what they said before they would open the door and let him have what his body needed in that moment. And if he couldn't do it, they wouldn't let him do that. A lot of ABA therapies are now saying we are neurodiversity affirming, but it is all based on the same behaviorist principles, which we now recognize as not neurodiversity affirming. But that is the only therapy that every single doctor is going to recommend. Why? because that is one of the therapies that every insurance will cover. Why? Because they have a lot of lobbyists. They have a lot of money. It's a very huge industry, and it's growing like crazy, obviously, with our diagnosing numbers, right? And so we are trying to move away from that thinking, especially with this more social model, okay? Now, again, every parent, every individual has to make their own choice. If you do your research and you feel like you want to try ABA therapy and it's working for your child, great, right? But the research that I've done and the things that I've seen, I don't ever personally recommend it.
Because the doctor kind of presented it as like providing you the tools to help them to, coping strategies and tools and things to help them to deal with.
Which can be learned in other ways. I actually have a handout that I did not put in your folders, but if anybody's interested in that, it gives a little bit more information on ABA if you would like to learn more. Other things that we try not to do is not honoring body autonomy except for safety. So a lot of times, especially in schools and the old speech therapists, hand over hand. If you're not pointing to the picture I want you to point to, I'm going to take your hand and I'm going to show you and I'm going to force you to point to that picture, right? The hand over hand. Some kids like you to do that. In fact, some kids will take your hand and want you to help them do it. Most kids do not, and that is not honoring their body autonomy. Now, if a child is climbing, and I see this a lot in my clinic, climbing up on the counter, I'm going to say, I'm going to help you move your body so that you can stay safe. So I'm explaining to them why I'm removing their body autonomy. We don't force feed. A lot of kids have difficulty with eating, right? If you think back to our sensory slide, eating is the only thing that involves every single one of those senses, all 8. We see our food, we touch our food, we smell our food, we hear it when we crunch or when we gulp, that interoception, if we're feeling full or if that fullness sensation is over processed in our brain. If they're feeling full, they're not going to want to eat, right? So all of those sensory things are involved in playing with eating. So that's why we see a lot of things with food, and they recognize every little detail that's different. They may always eat chicken nuggets from McDonald's, but if you try to get frozen chicken nuggets and cook them at home, they can tell. They can tell that it's different. It looks different, it smells different. Like to us, it's like, it's the same thing. They notice every single detail and it's different to them. We also, this is a new thing, we used to make eye contact goals in school. The child will maintain eye contact while talking to, whoever. Again, autistic adults that we have talked to and newer research studies have said it can be physically painful to look at somebody in the face. Why? Because every single minute change in a facial expression can mean something different. And that can be visually overwhelming to a person to the point that it feels painful. Okay, they hear you. They hear everything you're saying. They don't have to be looking at you. I was listening to a podcast of an autistic individual who is non-speaking. He's an adult now. He only communicates with a communication tablet. He said, I heard everything you said. Everything you said. I wasn't smart. I would never amount to anything. I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't a good student. I couldn't do anything. I heard everything you said. He said, now I'm working on my 2nd degree. He's non-speaking. He only communicates with a tablet. Working on his 2nd degree, and he's writing a book. Okay. But when he was younger, because he kind of seemed like he was in his own little world, he was listening. He was doing what his body needed at the time, and he was taking everything in the process. Okay, just real quick. Things that we often see with autism: OCD, ADHD, which is now being called ADHD, if it's autism and ADHD. PTSD and trauma, they sense everything more. This is a new one I just wanted to throw out there so you're aware of it. I'm still learning about it. Pathological demand avoidance. Those kids that no matter what you tell them to do, they do the opposite. This might be it. It's a persistent and it's a It's a type of autism, so you can have it, like, it's a specific type of autism. Persistent and marked resistance to the demands of everyday life that challenge their independence, autonomy, control, causing a trauma response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, trauma, like this is real trauma, okay? You ask them to do something, trauma. What do we do with that? How do we help that child, right? Heightened emotional responses, intense avoidance, or robot compliance, okay? This is again, something that I'm learning about. If you feel like you know a child that fits this description, I suggest that you learn about it. And I think I did put a flyer in your folder about it.
Quick question on that.
Yes,
Is there any relation between that and the oppositional defiance disorder?
I think a lot of kids with autism are probably misdiagnosed with that because it's very similar. Yes, and the flyer that I put in your folder, it has the website where I got that information, and so you can get some more information on it at that website. And then again, anxiety, right? Because everything is more, they're processing more, they're sensing more. The anxiety that must cause constantly. And then again, higher suicide rates. So this is overlapping symptoms of ADHD and autism. There's a lot. And then this is the autism PDA profile. It's in your slides. Oh, I don't think I handed this out, sorry. I'll hand it out. And then if you're interested, this is not scientific, but if you want to take a picture, this is a fun test. And with my family, it has been spot on to find out if you have any autistic tendencies yourself. And I'm gonna grab. I'm sorry, I had an evaluation that went a little over time, so I wasn't as prepared as I hoped to be. But this is a copy of all the slides in case. This is just a little online test. It's a kind of a fun thing. Again, it's not scientific.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I think my child is actually non-autistic, but is supposed to be, how do I get that diagnosis and more? Get away with it, finding out whether that's autistic, even though I see all the autism traits.
So that's tricky, right? And what I'm finding is that a lot of things are very subjective. Depends on the person, depends on their perspective, depends on what they need on them. The ABA companies are actually going to be given for diagnosis a lot faster than the developmental pediatricians. So a lot of times that's the soonest thing, because the developmental pediatricians, I think there's 2 in Tucson. The waiting list is like over a year to get an evaluation. So a lot of times, I see a lot of kids going to Access for Autism in Tucson. They can get them in sooner. It's an ABA therapy company. So you would think that it's in their best interest to diagnose as many kids with autism, because then they can be clients of their ABA therapy. But from the parents that I've talked to, it seems like they do a very thorough evaluation. You can get a diagnosis there and then get on the waiting list for the developmental pediatrician, because the developmental pediatrician should be looking through a whole, like a holistic lens, where I think the Access for Autism or the ABA company are looking through like an autism lens. And so the developmental pediatrician might see something that may be a genetic condition that could be in addition to the autism, or they also often will do like cheek swabs and do genetic testing and things like that to see if there's anything else that we're missing besides that autism that we're seeing. Does that make sense? There we go. Okay, just to show you what it looks like. So this is all my family. So again, remember that medical model makes it sound like level 1, level 2. It's like a linear thing. You're either really autistic or not really autistic. If you look at this, each autistic tendency can be different in every person. Again, every person is different, right? One person might be higher in social difficulty. Another might be higher in poor eye contact. but it's so varied and it's so different. I don't think, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3 does it justice, right? Because I don't know, I just think there's more depth to it than that. So this is me, at the top, me and my son, that just has ADHD, not autism. And then all of these on the bottom are the ones that are autistic. The one in the right-hand corner is my daughter-in-law, who I think is undiagnosed autistic. All right, I think that's all I have for you. I have a bunch of references, but they're in the slides that I handed out, if you want to check out any of those. I have a second presentation where I go through a lot more of these other things. So a lot of those references are also in there, so they're not all just for this presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
When do you do a second presentation if we were to want to look into the color and stuff like that?
We would just have to set it up. Yes.
So you're in Bisbee.
So I work in Douglas and Bisbee.
Okay.
Actually, I work for Copper Queen, but there's a lady that works for Chiricahua, Angelica Lopez. There's actually an autism support group through Chiricahua in Douglas. They have like monthly meetings. They have expert sessions. They've had me come a couple times and kind of explain the Gestalt language processing and things like that. So I've done a few presentations there. So I might be doing one there. I just did a community one in Bisbee. So we could do the second part in Bisbee as well. So we just have to figure out, I'm just trying to raise awareness, help people to understand that there's a little bit more to autism than maybe we thought. And we need to be treating these individuals with a lot more compassion than we may have been doing in the past.
When would be the next time you'd be out there in Douglas again?
Are you from Douglas?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. We haven't set up anything. I haven't set up anything with Angelica. But we usually like, Chiricahua tries usually to put it on their Facebook page. If you want to leave me like your email address next to your name, I can contact you.
And if you put your email address on there, she'll be able to.
Yeah, I can make a list and I can contact you the next time I do one. I've also done one with all of the medical providers with Copper Queen. I've done one with all the other employees with Copper Queen. Of course, it was like a choice if they came or not. I've done some community ones, and then there's this first one that I've done that's tailored more towards educators. But it's a lot of the same information because I feel like it's the basic things that we all need to learn. Yes.
What exactly do you do at your job?
So as a speech language pathologist, I actually treat kids through adults. Unfortunately, in the rural areas, we can't really specialize. We see everybody. I see anything from kids who can't pronounce sounds like articulation. I see swallowing disorders. I see stroke patients with aphasia. I see Parkinson's patients with voice issues. Kids with language issues. I'm helping some kids learn how to read. A lot of kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome, like just wherever they are, whatever they need support with their speech or language or swallowing or feeding. I try to help with that.
Do you have openings?
Right now, I'm the only one in the area and it's about a 3-month waiting list to get an evaluation. But I am in the process of trying to convince Copper Queen that we need some speech therapy assistants to kind of help out. So hopefully in the near future, we'll have some more help.
Well, I personally want to thank you for this. It's huge for us, just as parents with a kid that, you know.
Thank you for coming. And I do have a neurodiversity affirming parent primer.
Yeah.
I think that I can give you if I have it. If not, again, leave your email address and just write. So you want the extra flyer or something, and I'll send it to you. Any other questions? My card is in the folder. I am only at that desk Tuesday and Thursday for like 2 or 3 hours. And that's when I see inpatients at the hospital if they need swallow studies or cognitive exams for inpatients. So leave a message and I will get back with you when I can.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you very much for coming out and taking the time to do this. I think it's something we need more of in the community, so we'll look to setting up, another one and maybe that second.
The second part.
Yeah, the second part,
Perfect, thank you.
Get it in.
And I think we've talked about maybe what is it, in January,
Innovations company.
Yep,
so I might be speaking at that as well, so.
Yeah.
Is that just for educators or?
nope, anybody can come to that. We have an educational conference in January every year, so you'll probably come
It'll
there.
probably be the basic stuff, this, so we can reach as many people with the basic stuff, and then we'll kind of go from there. But thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here and you wanting to learn more, so thank you. And please